this is the second part, final, I think, of the rules introduction for Time of Wars Eastern Europe. If you've wandered into here without seeing the first part, you'll want to catch that first. This is going to be dry going, you know, rules read-throughs always are. I got to relight. They're important, and when I've got rules that are this hard to decipher, it becomes a greater burden on both of us. But, yeah. All right. So we dealt with commanders. Now we're going to, and this sequence of play comes late in the rule book. We're about halfway through the sequence, but the major stuff is really going to be in the player's impulses. So negotiations, this is going to be the diplomatic table there. If a superpower is at war and loses minimum one national space, player controlling it can consider himself defeated. He or she lost the war and in this way can force the peace. Okay, so if you lose a national space, the colored things, you're able to just declare, I lost. It's forbidden for two superpowers to be at war against each other in the next game turn. There's only one possibility to declare war in the next game turn. One of these two player plays in his or her next two impulses. As event cards, either provocation or, provocation, and then either declaration of war or diplomacy, which are going to be cards. They're italicized. Superpower which forces peace can retake lost national spaces. For each controlled fortified city which is given back to the previous owner, the war-winning superpower gains a victory point. Appropriate war fate marker is placed in the bonus VP marker, or 3 fund markers from the defeated superpower. For each given back city or fortified city, the winning superpower receives 1 fund marker from the losing superpower. Now, they have to have the fund markers for this to happen, I assume. So, what this means is these keys that you're going to be taking from the enemy from their national territory, not only national territory, there's keys that are up for grabs, are very easily returned to you at half value, you know, in the midst of a war. So it's going to be pretty easy, but it only happens during the negotiations phase for a player to do anything. Now, we have to remember the enforced peace, and there isn't, maybe that's this. I thought these were alliance markers. But yeah, I think that's going to be a forced peace. It looks like a peace sign. Except, it's not. It's alliances. Crapola. So yeah, we don't have something to mark that a war happened. These are on the back of the piece. And on the next turn, you can't go to war normally. And what's important is, on your 2 impulses in the in the turn that's ongoing, you have to play these 2 cards. Now, that may be in this game turn and not the next game turn. We'll have to see when the cards actually come out. And we may not answer the question, because if the circumstances don't come out that bring me to this rule and question it during the game, when the proper cards are in hand, I'm probably not going to think about that. But again, this is the kind of ambiguity that I'm getting from reading the rules, that maybe the cards resolve, maybe they don't. But I end up with big question marks in my head, the same way I did with EU. And they were well deserved with EU. 6.52, alliances and combat units borrowing. Again, that active passive voice being used with active verb. Players controlling superpowers can decide to make an alliance in the current game turn. Alliance marker must be placed in the diplomacy table. Allies cannot be at war against each other. Only events with a red asterisk can break that alliance. Okay, but you just decide to do this. Players can move their armies onto spaces belonging to allies. It's also allowed to intercept enemy army or withdrawn. Also, it is allowed to intercept. So players can move their armies onto spaces belonging to allies. It is allowed to intercept enemy armies, I guess, or perform withdrawals. I'm not sure. Combined allied armies defend as one army, even when one superpower. So that sentence is one where I'm not sure exactly what it means, but I kind of understand the scope of this, which is that allied forces get to work as the same thing. In a way, if you're going to be that ambiguous or non-understanding, and again, this may be a translation thing, I'd rather you just kind of leave the rules really not nailed down. But allies cannot be, allies cannot be at war against each other. Only events with red asterisks can break the alliance. Okay, we talked about that already. I'm getting lost again by the difficulty of the rule set. Players can move their armies onto spaces belonging to allies. They're allowed to intercept. Combined allies armies defend together. We're repeating ourselves. When combined army takes part in a land battle, commander's command rating of the most numerous army, this is not, here it is defined, must be used. Simply count the unit's counters, not their manpower or anything. If both armies are equal, dices are rolled. The highest result points out the commander. Yeah. I'm not going to go into my argument of why you wouldn't want to roll a pair of dice each for this. What you really want to do is go for an odd even die roll, but some people like roll-offs. Allied naval units can support each other if they are on the same sea. The ally can borrow combat units from allied superpower. These combat units should be covered with alliance markers, easy enough. The maximum number of these units is given in diplomacy table on crossing of corresponding row and column. So that is the number on the table. That's how many troops one side or the other can lend. It's nothing really complicated there. I had thought maybe that was how allied are you, how easy it is to form an alliance. Just looking at it. For example, the Holy Roman Empire can borrow from the Polish-Lithuanian 5 combat units, and Sweden can borrow from Tsardom of Russia. Well, 4. So this is going to be reciprocal, because the number is the same, and I assume you can borrow combat units in both directions in that case. The exception of the above rule is the Ottoman Empire, which cannot receive and borrow any units. Oddly enough, they have a number associated with them in each of those. What does that mean? Gosh, don't know. There's a big X with regard to Sweden, I guess. I don't know. No, that's not Sweden. I don't know who the hell this is. Oh, it's a minor state. That's why I don't know. That may be Denmark. I think so. That they can't borrow from. That seems really, really odd to me that they would have that number, and worse, that they have it with their minor state allies. But whatever. It's forbidden to borrow naval units. Players can use allied naval units during movement across sea. And that may be able to cause combat as well. Announcements. According to the sequence, the order of the different players that's fixed, one player announces an alliance. If an announced superpower confirms that an alliance, the players can borrow each other's combat units. Borrowed units must be placed on the national spaces of that ally closest to the unit's order. I think you announce your alliance as a whole there, not just what you can borrow, but apparently the borrowing takes place at this point, and units actually get moved at this point. Free arrangements. Players can make secret arrangements to coordinate their strategy. Controlled spaces and our fund markers are considered as payment. Okay, secret things that have on-game effects are a little weird, but okay. That have visible effects within the game, such as the payments. Player controlling superpower can remit captured space only if that space is connected to his or her own national spaces. I think this is somehow within the alliance negotiation rules. For this rule, treat port spaces by the same sea as connected. Terrain points cannot be remit. They don't have control, so that's not an issue. If player controlling superpower does not have enough fund markers to pay for obligations, again, I think this is all just negotiated values, he or she must discard a certain number of cards. For each randomly selected card from his or her hand, he receives one fund marker, which is immediately transferred. This is the only way you can use this kind of fake money. After secret negotiations, all arrangements are announced in public. Okay, they're not that secret. According with the sequence, players start announcements. If announcement is about a superpower, the player controlling it confirms or rejects the announcement. Players are obligated to fulfill only confirmed arrangements. Only those arrangements are implemented during the gameplay. Okay. When secret negotiations are over, players cannot make any arrangements. So you can make secret agreements during this that have no payment, no announcement. But if something does involve transferring territory or money, then something happens, then it's announced. I'm sorry, my brain isn't working very well. I'm still sick. I am a little confused about the remitting captured space concept. So maybe I need to look up the word remit because I'm not sure which direction it goes in. And I'm also, though, not sure that they intend for that to be in a direction. So, if this was a proper grammatic English situation, I would read into, well, remit is the active thing, so I am giving you the captured space. But it kind of is the active thing anyway, so that's more just a convention than anything else. So what I don't know is, I believe remitting is giving, right? You know what, I'm going to go look this up. I don't know if this works, being able to view the screen on here. It appears to be here. So if I look, but there's, weird effects. Cancel or refrain from exacting or inflicting a debt or punishment. That doesn't apply. Send money or payment as a gift. Giving you territory, but, whatever. And then the others are rather different. Those are the British style. So I would say that the language is being misused here. This is not the right verb. Now, that's understandable, but I'm going to have to go on intuition on this. That intuition, and that's the best I can do. Where is it now? Yeah, is that remitting a captured space is giving a space you've captured that's not part of your national territory. This is what makes the most sense to me. Which means Poland could remit these territories to anyone. Now, let's look at the limitation. Only if that space is connected to his or her own national spaces. Oh, okay. That creates additional problems. Because if remitting is giving, that means if I was cut off here, I couldn't give this away. And very clearly, there's only one active person here. If remitting is taking, it would make some sense as well. And I really don't know what the intention here is. I'm going to kind of leave it as a fuzzy gray area and maybe disregard this rule because, look, it wouldn't make a lot of sense if, as Poland, I can remit this to the Habsburgs. It's not connected to the Habsburgs in any way. So that feels wrong. It feels like I should be, it feels like the person being given the territory is the one who has to have connectivity. But that is not at all how this is worded. But it's the controlling superpower can remit as opposed to the receiving superpower, which I don't know, I'm left with drawing a blank. So I think the most reasonable thing is you can give up any territory you control as long as the person who's receiving it is within connectivity to it. That may not be what's intended. There may be some kind of intention to prevent you from giving up territory that is no longer really connected to you. But that doesn't make a lot of sense. The idea being, well, you could give something up to prevent someone from taking it from a non-ally, from someone they're not at war with. Especially since declaring war comes later in the sequence. Okay. According to the sequence, players then can declare war. To declare war, the player controlling a superpower must be on used cards, deck one or more cards. Must put on used cards, deck one or more cards. The sum of the operational points of these cards is equal to or higher than the number in the dip table. Okay, so here's the reason why the Ottomans have numbers on their diplomacy table. So that number seems to represent a correspondence between the two countries. So it's harder to declare war on a country that you could give more troops to. And that now makes a lot of sense to me. I didn't think it was used for anything else. Or something. I don't know. Maybe I thought it was used for this and not that before. For example, if Sweden declares war against Denmark, you have to discard one card with operational value of 3 or 2 cards who add up or whatever. The plus sign has no special meaning in this case. You don't need it. Combat units of superpower, which is at war against other superpower or minor state, can move onto enemy spaces. I think that means under normal condition, during your impulses, as opposed to it just happens. Moreover, it is allowed to conduct sieges and land in or naval battles. If the war is indicated by placing a war marker crossing the appropriate row and column. They don't say the same about the alliance, do they? Yeah, they do. Okay. So again, there's nothing to mark the, hey, you can't go to war right now. I can come up with something like a war and a peace on this alliance on the same thing. Religious unrest. Okay, this is a new phase in the game. If we can find the phase. It's always useful, and I don't see it here, for there to be a sequence of play available on the play aids. That might be on the back of one of these, some kind of card or something. You can make your own, but, All right. Dominant religion of each space at the beginning of gameplay is given on the space religion chart. Okay, so this is interesting. Let's take a look at the dominant religion of Sich at the beginning of play. Where would we find that? We would find that in the gray area. There isn't a gray area. There it is. Its dominant religion is Orthodox, but it is controlled by the Poles. It's presumably why it's in heresy to begin with, because it's inside the Russian territory and thus is being controlled. Of course, that doesn't work here, even though, so the idea here is these are Christian areas, but they're within the Ottoman cultural area. All right, well, we'll keep seeing what we can understand of that. In the case of religion change, a new religion is marked on that chart. Every change must be updated. Okay. Each superpower has a dominant religion, and both the Holy Roman Empire and the Polish have Catholicism. Okay. So, from what I can see, you're able to download this for free in order to mark it up. I could also use grease pencil on it. It is slick, so probably erases. I might do that instead, just for ease, because that's pretty, and whatever I can print out is going to look hideous. Okay. Now, what's problematic about this, though, is the initial is marked, but I guess if there's a mark anywhere else, you would count it as that instead. Okay. I don't know how religions change. A space is heretic when as event is played a heresy card. On the space must be placed a heresy marker in its backside of control marker. After playing the heresy card, player marks new religion on space religion chart. There is no heresy on space religion chart. So we don't know what that is talking about. Heresy can occur on any space. Conversion of heresy spaces into spaces with superpowers dominant religion. It's possible to change heresy back into superpowers dominant religion. Now, one could make assumptions that a heresy in a particular language, cultural zone is going to be the dominant religion of that zone. So in this case, the heresy here is the Eastern Orthodox, which is what it corresponds with there. But what is a heresy within, what would a heresy be within the proper place? So, for example, if a Russian territory went heretical under Russian control, it certainly wouldn't turn Catholic, I think. My feeling is it would still be sort of an Eastern Orthodox heresy. I don't think we go into this, but it is possible to change heresy back into superpower dominant religion. During your own impulse, you play as an operational card. The player plays as operational points a card with a plus sign. After spending operational points on other actions, a plus sign is used to move the religion DP marker one box to the right. And that would be like this. This is the Catholic. That's an interesting way to say it. Okay. On the track, the player points out a heretic space which has connection with space of superpowers dominant religion. Now, this is a little weird. Before we had connection, and the only way I could talk about it was extended connections, essentially. So, like, Russia is connected to this, but if they own this, now they're connected to this, even though this is not a national space of that power. Now, again, I think if we look, I think in the, and this is why it's so expensive to do these, you know, some of these games. If we look for the map thing, national space is a space in color of a particular superpower or minor state. Oh boy. Well, okay. Zones are a different thing. They're culture, language, or religion in general. That's not what they're talking about. So they're talking about this. So when it was talking about remitting locations, they had to be connected. My assumption was it wasn't directly connected. If it was directly connected, it would mean this could never be remitted to anyone, right? Even if the Russians were up against it or whatever. I don't like that, and I don't think that's what's meant. But here, it's also talking about connected for changing the religion of a space. It may be possible to leapfrog changing religion, and that would be a way that would consistently deal with the concept of connectivity. Again, not defined, you know. I tend not to think in that way, because usually you inched your way forward just as you would with pieces that you control. Maybe connectivity with religion requires it to go through the religions. I don't know. Let's take a look at this again. Points out a heretic space which has connection with spaces of a superpower's dominant religion. Oh, that's fine. In fact, it means that Austrians could use Polish spaces to get their connectivity, which works. I can buy that. All right. And again, this is the cost to trying to figure out, weakly written rules. Player rolls a die. If the result is lower than or equal to current number of religious development points, which will be up to 5 of them, the conversion is successful. A control marker can be flipped onto the front side. The marker religion DP is put back to 0. You've completed. Now, this means that you can do attempts in one space, and they improve your chance of doing an attempt in a different space. But once you succeed, you're back to 0, and your attempts are going to be on the 1 roll. Note, you don't have to play another card. The plus sign itself is being used to move these. If the result is equal to or lower, yeah. If the result is higher, the conversion is unsuccessful. The religion DP is moved 1 box to the left, which means you will always either be on the 1 box or the 0 box, from what I can see. If you attempt, now maybe you can move this without doing a conversion procedure. I assume there's ways you can. But as of right now, this process moves you 1 space to the right, and then you get to roll. And if you fail, you move back left. So you'd only have a 1 in 6 chance ever to get it done, unless there's something else at play. And it will always send you back to 0. That's assuming nothing else moves that religious track, which is probably not the case. That may be an error. But it does mean that an attempt in one place does not help attempts in other places, which was kind of bugging me anyway. Okay. Effect of heresy. Revolts on spaces. A revolt can occur on a city or fortified city space or a fortress. Number of heretic spaces controlled by superpower in a certain zone is used as a column in the combat results table. I guess as the combat value. Then the player rolls 2 dices. The number of revolted spaces in that zone is given on crossing of the die roll result and set column. The player controlling the kingdom of Sweden. Okay, so Sweden places the revolts for the Russians. Russia places revolts in the Balkans, the Turkish area, etc. So each player has 1 player who does religious revolts, and we'll probably put them to their own advantage. A revolt can also happen as a player playing the heresy card. If a combat unit enters a revolt space, the revolt is automatically ended. In removal of auxiliary markers, the revolt markers are also removed from the map. For each removed marker, the domestic policy DP marker is moved 1 box to the left. Now, I believe if you go from 0 back to 5, that's possible, and that the domestic policy can become a level worse because of that. That's what I remember. I don't think we've hit that yet. Mercenaries hiring. At the beginning of the mercenaries hiring phase, all mercenary combat units must be placed in the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation box. Problem here. So, a little earlier, we had something, and I thought it was in the war section, but we just did that. We had something about the Holy Roman Empire, yeah. Okay. So, if the Holy Roman Empire declares this special kind of war, which I think would happen, doesn't say when it happens, it might be able to happen at any time. I think that would happen, though, or I would think that it would happen in the war declaration phase, but apparently this is some kind of special declaration of war. So what happens is these are all available for purchase at this point. During the impulses, I think it's possible for the Holy Roman Empire to recoup some of these by declaring war on someone who's within its borders, who's violating the empire, using the rules that we looked at earlier. Oh boy, we're losing it here, man. Each player selects one mercenary combat unit. There are 2 rounds of hiring, so each player can hire 2. Each player, this is how the hiring sequence is done. Each player chooses a card from its hand, and its value is not revealed. You can't choose a special card. Every player shows their bid, their card. The player which chooses card with highest value selects a mercenary combat unit first. In the case where 2 or more players have chosen card with equal value, the general sequence breaks ties. All players put the chosen cards in their used card deck. So if you want mercenaries, you have to play a card for them, for each mercenary you want, and you're allowed to do this twice. When the 2 rounds are over, players add combat units to their armies. It's forbidden to have an army composed solely of mercenaries. If this requirement cannot be fulfilled, the mercenary goes back to the Holy Roman Empire, but you still paid for it. That would be foolish. Mercenary units cannot be placed in fortified cities or fortresses as garrisons. The exception for this is Stettin, where a garrison stays until this fortified city is captured by superpower. Now, at the beginning of the game, Stettin is where? It's over here. And it just has this particular mercenary there. I assume that mercenary cannot be pulled out by any means until somebody captures it. And then it becomes a mercenary army normally available. Okay. Eliminated mercenary combat units are placed off the board, but they come back, I guess. That seemed to be the case. And the armies return to capital cities, place them all back. Combat units, all mercenary combat units leave armies and counters are placed off board. Strategic deployment of one army. According to the sequence, standard order, not reverse. Each player can move one army stationed in a capital city. Stationing, but the army can be moved by an unlimited number of superpower-controlled spaces, but cannot enter spaces controlled by allies. All terrain types can be traversed during this movement. Armies could also be deployed across the sea, but the number of such units depend on the combat value of the naval units. Each combat value point allows you to move one combat unit. It is forbidden to combine land and naval deployment. You can use one of those 2 possibilities. All right. We've gotten a couple of pages in. I'm feeling like shit again. So we're going to go and hold off for the next big part. This is the meat of the turn coming up. The player's impulses. This is where you play a card and take an action. Play a card, take an action. I hope. I don't remember one way or the other. I hope that it's alternating. Otherwise, it doesn't feel like a CDG at all, right? Let's peek. Yeah, it looks like it. It's not well worded, but it looks like that's the intention. And we're going to assume that's the case because of what it's based on. After a little bit of sleep, and if some wildlife comes by, I may end up swinging the camera over to catch it, just as a warning to people who aren't used to me. Okay. According to the sequence, the order of play standard, which is not represented by how I have the cards on the board, unfortunately. Players play their cards. Active players, the player conducts action during his or her own impulse. All other players are inactive. Player's impulse is, okay, the player's impulse, here it says impulse, it should be player's impulses. The reason that's important is because if you just read this, if it wasn't underlined and all that, you might think a single player's impulse, but no. Is over when all players decline doing an action, which sounds like you're going to be alternating, although I don't think that's specified. It can be a player's impulse. So here we're using that same thing, the same term, right, as we used here, and it really should be, this shouldn't be called anything close to the word they're using for what each player can do. It can be playing one card or playing two cards if one of them has a plus sign. Before playing a card, you can spend fund markers. For each spent marker, you can draw a card which can be played during the current impulse. Doesn't say that it can't be held, though. All right. And now we jump to something. So this is sort of the broad overview of this, and then we get into, you know, how you do specifics. But in this broad overview, we have this sort of, it can occur during battles, resolve active player, attacker, and inactive players. Okay, it can occur that during battles resolve sections, active player and inactive players play unlimited number of battle or battle reaction cards. I.e., you have a chance to throw down, you know, effects, instant effects, essentially. But you can't play two identical cards will not add any additional impact. What they mean by identical is not clear. So like they say, if you have two optimism cards, you can play both, but effective only one impulse affects the battle. Do they have different meaning? Do some of them have different values? There'd be no reason you would do this, to just get rid of cards for no reason. Well, maybe that's not true. Player can decline to play any card only when one of the two situations occurs. They have no more cards in their hand, or after playing special cards, the number of possessed cards is equal to or lower than the number of preserved cards. So you have to play all the special cards that you have in your initial hand, and then at some point, once you're down to your preserved cards limit, you can pass. But you can't pass when you still have playable cards that you don't have a way of, because you don't have a way of getting rid of them at the end of the turn. Does this matter? I don't think so, because I suspect that people get to play out all their cards no matter what. So there's no reason to, like, say you don't want to do anything. But what you can't do is hold on to cards with the hope of coming back in and pass in that sense, from what I can read here. Playing one card, you can play it as ops points, 1, 2, or 3, or as an event. In special cases, you can play cards as an event during a battle, and they'll say battle or battle reaction, supposedly. I don't know. I don't Haven't seen one yet, but event during another player's impulse, those cards are marked with reaction. And I think that's going to be on the colored band over here in both cases, from what I read before. Playing as ops points, if you play a card with value of 3, it's forbidden to combine 2 cards with lower values. So this is an obnoxious way to do things, because here I'm reading, and now I get to this parenthetical, but I still don't know what I'm trying to do. He or she can take 1 fund marker, but cannot conduct an action. Okay, and again, the grammar's wrong. By discarding a card of value 3, essentially, you can get a fund marker. Player can freely use... I feel like I'm doing the playtest stuff here because I just did one, but, you know. Player can freely use operational points and take an action. The operational points cost of an action is given an available actions table on the superpower sheet. That's this chart up here. Combat unit recruitment is also an action, and its cost depends on the cost of the units available. In the case of playing 1 card with a plus sign, now we got to be careful here because I found some stuff that kind of fuzzed me. After using operational points, the player can move one of the DP, not DP. Why is it called DP? I don't know why it's called DP. Now I need to know. Because DP sounds like it's domestic policy, but there are domestic policy DPs. Development points. Okay. Like with the tech, well, not tech, like with the Army military capability, and I immediately linked that to the tech in EU. Someone online, and it may be the designer. I'm not good with names. Yeah, neither is the rulebook. Has been commenting on that this is not really just tech, it's morale and all kind of other stuff. And it does kind of work if you include like commander insight and stuff like that, so they end up in the right battlefield. Now the commander has his own sort of tactical rating, but in addition to any technological advantages, I also include soft tech, which is organizational type capabilities, and I include doctrine, you know. But in this, they're including, it seems to be, certainly morale of the units. Now, I claim that morale is sort of a flexible type of thing. Like, if you lose battles, you will lose capability. There might be something about that, though. I seem to remember those get decreased. So they might actually get hit when you take losses. We haven't gotten to that yet, which would make me very happy if that's the case. But my memory's not good enough. But also, it's going to kind of affect, you know, so like some of these armies are very different from some others. And my contention is that the Polish-Lithuanian army is not significantly different from like the Hungarian army at Mohawks. Very high morale, heavy cavalry, and hussars and whatnot that are able, sorry, somebody wants me to call them hussars, but I like hussars better. It looks, but yeah. But that's not something that works in all situations, right? Now, no military organization works in all situations, but cavalry is just not as flexible as you know, your sturdy infantry blocks would be. So in certain terrains, it's going to be really troublesome. Now, luckily for the Poles, most of the terrain that they're going to fight in, in the swamps, is going to be pretty healthy terrain for Cav to be fighting in. The Russians have even more backwards army. Basically, they don't have as good a heavy Cav contingent, and their infantry is pretty much crap. But then when you start looking at things like the Austrians in particular, and the Swedes later on change things up completely, right? I mean, Gustavus Adolphus's military reforms basically get picked up by the rest of Europe. But when you look at the Habsburgs, or even perhaps more, the Ottomans are kind of waning a little bit at this point. With the Ottomans, you're looking at forces that are really organized in a very, very, very different fashion, whereas the Polish-Lithuanians are organized almost like a medieval force. Not really. See, one of the problems is we don't really know what a medieval force was organized as. So, yeah, you can't really say that. But in terms of that reliance on the heavy Cav charge and whatnot, it's a certain kind of view that looks back to, a couple hundred years earlier, really, where we actually do have, when I say we don't really know much about the medieval, we do know about like Crécy and Poitiers and stuff, and Agincourt. What happened there is fairly well described, and this kind of army isn't that far away from it. Although apparently they were using the carousel. Hey. Oh, so where the hell are we? Okay. Yeah, you can move. So if you place a card with a plus sign, after using ops points, the player can move one of the development point markers. The marker can be moved by one box to the right on the appropriate track on the superpower sheet. If it's in 5, presumably after you move it, you do an action and go back to the start. A certain attribute must be changed. Okay. And now I think we're going to be getting into information about that, but it starts getting weird because it's like crisis and collapse. Okay. If the economy marker is in the leftmost of the economy track and some game procedure forces it to move left further, yeah, this is something I mentioned, the marker's position remains unchanged, but domestic policy must be weakened. Okay, so if the marker remains unchanged, you lose an entire layer. You don't just lose one space, which triggers the layer. Let's assume the domestic policy of the Tsardom of Russia is 2 cards more, and economy marker is in the -3 box. Let's take a look at this. Okay, the economy marker would be back here. What does this matter? Moreover, economy DP is in 2DP total 2. In removal of auxiliary markers phase, player must remove from national spaces 3 famine markers. Economy and domestic policy change as follows. Now, we haven't hit this rule, but it's being referenced here. The economy DP in start 0 DP box. Okay, it was in 2, now it's lost 2 spaces from 3 famine markers. We don't know what the trade-off is. This marker should be moved 1 more box to the left, but it's impossible, so it looks like it's 1-to-1. Domestic policy must be lowered 1 level. Now it is 1 card more. So they lose a point off their domestic policy from that. And it doesn't get them to the 5 DP space there, so they're not close to getting it back. So you never want to be sitting near that 0. Oh, man. If domestic policy is 2 cards less and the player is forced to lower it further, it remains unchanged, but the economy marker is moved to the left as many boxes as domestic policy should have been moved. So if you screw up your domestic policy badly enough, then you start hurting your economy. Makes sense. Example there. If economy and domestic policy are both on the lowest possible, combat units are permanently removed from gameplay. The superpower loses one combat unit immediately when some game procedure forces it to lower either economy or domestic policy. Now, careful, this is within this if. Don't just read this paragraph with the bullet that is easier to find. During ruler's domestic policy phase, 2 combat units are removed when economy and domestic policy are still on the lowest levels. Oh boy. What phase? Okay, so it looks like at the very end of the turn. Now this appears to be a dot on this as well, but I think that's okay. So you'd lose, if both of them are on the lowest level, you'll lose 2 more combat units in addition to any that you lose from banging against the wall. That's how I read it. Removed combat units are selected by the next player according to the sequence. Player controlling Polish selects units belonging to the Kingdom of Sweden, which I think gives you a wraparound. Overinvestment. So far, we still don't know what happens when you play these as operational. Not when you play these as operational points. So you're playing the card as operational points. This is all part of the special case if you play a plus sign card. And whether or not you can play another ops card after that plus sign is left to the player's discretion in terms of how they want to interpret the rules. I haven't found anything. So one of the uses of the plus sign is definitely that you can play another ops card, although we haven't mentioned that yet here. It may be that in addition to that extra card, you can play with the development track, or it may be instead of that extra card, you can play with the development track. Not clear. Okay, so we don't know what happens when we hit here, right? It says do an action, okay? All right, overinvestment. If military level is 2 columns to the right, it is forbidden to move military DP marker to the right. So this is also important. If your military reaches its maximum, it's always going to be very, very tenuous. And again, that kind of makes sense, right? If it's including morale and stuff, you lose a battle or something goes wrong and the army will no longer be at that very top pitch. But what it means is you can't defend yourself by moving the DP marker further up from possible losses. If domestic policy is 2 cards or more, it's forbidden to move domestic policy to the right. This makes a little less sense. A well-oiled economy, again, is going to be just ready to break all the time. If economy marker is on the rightmost box of the economy track, it's forbidden to move the economy DP marker to the right. Again, same kind of situation. If you're doing the best as you can with your economy, it's liable to be able to fall back. And it falls back a whole space and you're still on the 0 space, so you're still close to falling back a whole space. Okay. And that's all they talk about, nothing about the religious being overinvested. Okay, now we skip away from what the potential effect of those plus card on the DP and how that integrates is. We forget about that altogether. We went into all this detail, but we still don't know how it kind of works, right? And what it does. Maybe we'll be told. But it's not for a long time. All right, so we go to playing cards as events. We still don't know what happens when you play as ops points, except you can do one of these things. Okay. The plus card, we're not seeing anything that says you can play a second card, although that was referred to way back early as something you could do to get more ops points. It almost seems like there's two divergent rule sets going on. I don't know. I'm sure that's not the case. Playing cards as events. If a player decides to play a card as an event, he implements instruction given on the card. Text on the card overrides general rules. This is standard stuff. If there's a red asterisk on it, the event card is permanently removed. Now, these are the ones that at the beginning of each turn you can paw through your deck, draw a new one, and go through all the actions of trying to shuffle those hard, stiff cards. Some of these cards can be played by strictly indicated game turns. See the event description. You can't play red asterisk cards in the 7th turn unless the event description states differently. Some events have impact on the next impulses or game turn. If you play an event on a specific card, you put the marker in the events in play. Below picture shows all possible events which must be marked by events in play. All right. I have not found all of these in my sorting. So let's see what we got here, and let's see. So I've got Danzig exercises, which I haven't found anything for. That's not on here. I've got Descartes. That's not on here. I've got Dominion Maria Baltiki. That's not in here. That's going to be... these are just victory point bonus points. I'm just making sure. These vassal subjugations are not on here. I've got these two. Baltic trade, again, that's a different rule. Russian cultural zone. Does that exist here? No. Okay, so this is interesting. The only one that I have that I know of is the Union of Brest, which apparently I have chosen the wrong piece. Whatever the fuck this one says. Converted spaces. For the track. Now, I don't remember how far you have to go to get that on there. That's the only one that shows up here. The others are events, though. That's why they're not on here. And this is not an event, but maybe there's an event piece that also says Union of Brest and goes up there. I don't remember. Okay. I forgot there were event chips, even though I read this. All right. Special cards. There are two instructions on each special card. First is implemented when the card is played as an event. Okay, so that would be, I guess, the top part here. When the card is played as ops points, the second instruction must be implemented after conducting all actions. And there's an if you play it as ops points, so that helps remind you of this special case. Player has at his or her disposal as many operational points as sum of cards value. Oh no, this is the plus cards. Okay. Special cards must be played every game turn. They cannot be preserved for the next turn. So let's take a look at one of these. On economy track, move the economy one box to the right. That's good. Your domestic policy is decreased by one level. Not so good. You get a fund. Okay. So if you play this as an event, it's a so-so. If you play this card as ops points, you lose a fund. If you do not have a fund, you must discard a card or move economy marker to the left. So special cards don't look like they're good. If you think about in Here I Stand, which has these kind of repeating special cards, they tend to be decent. If you play this card as an operational points, you lose one fund marker and your domestic policy is reduced by one level. Now, cession of the sejm is what happens if you don't. No clue what that is. No clue. It's written on the back of here, but I think it's just historical. Given that it has no play capabilities, I'm going to say probably you can throw this card away without effect, or you can play it as ops. You lose a fund marker, and your domestic policy is reduced by a level. Basically, if you, the session, I guess, is the parliament. If you play this, and you allow them to deal, well, they're fine, you know. But if you want to do something with them, it's going to cost you. So yeah, I think all the specials are kind of not just good cards. Okay, player can play 2 cards if one of them has a plus side. Now this does not seem to impact this. It looks like you get to fiddle with this in addition, the way it's worded. 2 cards can be played only as operational points. It is forbidden to play 2 cards as events or combination event operational points. Player has at his disposal as many operational points as the sum of the card's values. Playing 2 cards, player can spend sum of operational points to move one of 4 markers. The marker can be moved as many boxes as the sum of operational points. So this goes here. After you use all your operational points, I would think, you can move one of these markers. The marker can be moved by 1 box to the right. Now, that sounds like you get a free bonus move of a marker here from the way this is worded. But the way this is worded, it sounds like you can just use all your points, or as many as you like, if you have a plus card, to play around with these tracks. Once again, we've talked about these tracks, and we still don't know what happens when you get to the end in terms of an action. Okay? Actions. You have an available actions table. It tells you what it costs to do each thing. Okay. Those are straightforward, and I'm pretty cool with them so far. All right, we're going to get to the meat of the movement and whatnot, but I need to break. Some movement. Movement is done here by opposite points. What it states here, though, is before movement begins. Well, I don't know what that means, right? You know, because you spend an operation point to move a space. Each individual space of movement, or before any of your movement begins. There's no real concept of any of your movement, but I could see where that was intended. Player can combine 2 weakened combat units of the same type and formation into 1 full-strength combat unit. One counter is flipped to the front side, the other is placed aside. I will be keeping them on the card. To be used in further gameplay. This procedure is free in terms of operational points expenditure. Now, the fact that they say it's free in terms of operational points expenditure makes me think before you move any units, you have to do this. I don't see it as being that big a deal, but it could be if combat happens in the midst of your expenditure of operational points. In which case you would have to do it, I guess, for all units you're moving, even though you might do other actions before you do this. I don't know. Okay. And then they give the costs, you know, regular roads cost an operational point to move an entire force, I guess. They don't specify that. In many games, it would be by piece. But again, using my knowledge of, you know, how Here I Stand works, it's moving a stack. And they say army moving on to an enemy-controlled fortified city or fortress must end its movement. So army seems like more than a piece. It is forbidden to start a siege during the current impulse. Which again lends credence to the follow the Here I Stand type rules where players are alternating actions. But again, not as clearly stated. If it is stated, I don't remember anymore. If the sum of manpower ratings of the moving combat units is 12 or more, one loss must be suffered when movement is finished. In this way, any combat unit can be weakened or eliminated. It is player's choice. Again, what means finished, right? Is that the movement of one space, or could you move several spaces and then take one effect of attrition? Not at all clear. Don't know which way I'm going to do that. My feeling here is that it's a stack moving as many spaces as it wishes to, but it would make sense that a larger force would degenerate very quickly as it moves quickly, and this would be a cap on that. It's not clear which way it goes. Movement across sea, it's possible only when the superpower possesses naval units on a given sea. The procedure for that, the Army begins the player's impulse on a controlled port space. You pay an operational point, and the Army is transferred to any port space by a given sea. If destination space is controlled by enemy, a land battle can occur. Limit of transferred combat units depends on the combat value of the naval units. Each combat value point enables the movement of an entire combat unit. However many manpower it is, doesn't matter. So however big a combat unit is, whatever it is, it fits in one space of ship, which is the combat capability of the ship, which might be fair, might not. It's hard to tell. It's very abstracted. You know, the galleys, yeah, they've probably got less cargo capacity than the bigger ships of the era. 1660, we're not quite up to, you know, your ships of the line and whatnot of the 1700s and the big transports that went along with them. During movement across the sea, the enemy superpower can start a naval battle. And we'll get to that somewhere else under this 6.9. Interception. Inactive player can try to intercept an army when all the following requirements are fulfilled. Superpower of active player is at war against inactive player. Inactive player's army is on a space connected by road with space just entered by the active player's army. An inactive player's army is accompanied by a commander. The inactive player rolls a die. If it's equal to or less than the commander's command rating, the interception is successful. The intercepting player's army is moved onto the space. The active player can choose either to return, paying movement cost in operational points onto space occupied before entering the space. So you'll pay to move into this new space and then to run away as well, which that is odd, but I have no objection. It's just I haven't seen that kind of mechanism in play before. Army returns, paying movement cost. That's what I read. Or a land battle begins with the active player, the player who played the card, as the attacker, not the interceptor. During one impulse, one army can try many attempts at interception. Okay. Now, right here, we're not sure what happens with the land battle, right? As of right now in the rules, I don't know whether or not it interrupts the play of the card. Does it impact further movement? You know, will I be able to say I started movement again for the purpose of combining units? For the purpose of attrition, am I forced to say I started again? Not sure. These are the costs to not writing the rules solidly. And what that means is I will be playing some version of a game with these components. And this is why you can never bring this to a tournament type play until somebody hammers out the rules and gets them to a reasonable level, right? I would have no problem bringing this to most of the gaming groups that I've been involved in, but I would just make up the rules as I go, right? I would tell them what the rules are and what my interpretation is. More recently, not since I moved to Eugene, but back when I was in Phoenix, the gaming groups I was in were more likely to say, hey, send me a copy of the rules, I'll learn the game. And that takes burden off the person teaching the game or whatever, but a game like this becomes impossible because any two people will have different interpretations of what the rules are going to be. So, I actually kind of prefer teaching the rules simply because even though it's more expensive and takes longer, it conforms with what my thoughts are on what the rules should be, and no one else, gets an input. But it's one reason I have so many games, or had at one point. Now I have more, but I don't play them with people. Okay. What do we got here? Withdrawal before battle. If a hostile army moves onto a space occupied by the inactive player's army, that army can withdraw before battle resolution. It can only enter a terrain point or space controlled by superpower or its ally. Well, which superpower is not defined, but we know it's the one who's withdrawing, right? So the inactive player can withdraw into their own territory, but by superpower. By that superpower, maybe the extra word would help, I don't know. It is allowed to withdraw into a controlled port space if an army occupies a port space by the same sea. The number of combat units is limited by the number of possessed naval units at sea. So this is completely written wrong. What it should say is it's allowed to withdraw over sea from a controlled port space into, well, how is it said? Onto? Maybe it actually makes sense. It's horrible. It totally doesn't work in terms of giving the information, giving the proper impression. But it is allowed to withdraw onto controlled port space, any controlled port space, if any should be on there or whatever, or something like that. If an army occupies a port space by the same sea. So if I occupy a port space, well, like this one, I could withdraw into another port space that I control. And it actually works out, but trying to decipher the logic of it is painful. And then again, you're limited by the naval transfer. And I'm sorry this is taking so long, but this is why I kind of didn't do the rules for EU or La Grande Guerre. They're the same kind of stuff, right? Where I basically have to piece through it. I'm looking at something that is in at least as bad a case, badish development shape as most of the games that I'm sent to playtest. When I'm sent something to playtest. But this is a larger game. And EU and La Grande Guerre are in the same category. They were not ready to be released yet. This would not be ready to be released. In America either. In Europe, things are different, I guess. Not every European company. Europa Simulations seems to do a fairly good job of nailing a lot down. Okay. Losses after withdrawal. One combat unit suffers a loss when an enemy army has a minimum one cavalry combat unit more, i.e. the person you're withdrawing from. Now what's interesting, army returns, not withdraws, good. Each combat unit suffers a loss when enemy army has 2 times more cavalry combat units. Each combat unit suffers a loss when there is no cavalry combat unit and enemy army has a minimum of 1, which is 2 times more cavalry or more. There's no or more here, which would lead. that extra sentence leads me to say, well, what about if there's three times, just to be a dick. But honestly, I don't think the third sentence is necessary, a third bullet. If an inactive player's army is on controlled fortified city or fortress space, the player can select one infantry combat unit as garrison. This unit does not take part in land battle resolution. So this is interesting. This is in the section of losses after withdrawal, but seems to actually apply to the land battle as a whole. But maybe not. Maybe the only time that you throw the garrison in there is when you withdraw or retreat or whatever. And in this case, I don't know. Its placement leads to some interesting questions. Without additional words like during a withdrawal, which is what its positioning kind of implies. But okay, a land battle is resolved when two opposing armies are in the same space. Each player sums up the combat values of all combat units in his or her army. Total number indicates the basic column over on the combat results table. Okay. Each player will shift columns based on the superpower military level. So if we look at our happy Poles here, they get 2 column shifts to the right. And their army was incredibly effective in the early part of this period. In the battles that it fought on flat terrain and, where that heavy cavalry army could work. It could end up fighting in places where that army should not work. And that's not addressed well. Because there's plenty of mountainous terrain I wouldn't want to bring that cav into. Okay. Active player gets to play cards that are marked as battles. Engaged inactive player gets to play cards that are battle. And other inactive players can play cards battle or reaction to support engaged inactive player. Only the inactive player. After cards are played, the columns can be further shifted. If it goes beyond the limits of the table, it stays on the final column of the table. Each player rolls 2 dice and totals the results. Each player rolls 2 dice. Interesting. Okay. Commander influence minus modified sum. So we each rolled 2 dice. So this is really going to be interesting. We each just rolled 2 dice and totaled them. Commander influence minus modified sum. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Let's keep reading. Maybe it'll tell us. Results lower than command rating are equal to command rating. Okay. Okay. We got an example. Let's assume that the results of 2d6 is 2 and 5 and a command rating is 4. Result of 5 is unchanged, but 2 is changed to 4. The modified sum becomes 9. Okay, so this is not minus. The commander affects the modified sum. So I roll 2 dice with none of the dice being lower than the commander's rating. He boosts any dice up to that. That's what it means. In combat result table, on crossing of previous set column with row of modified sum, oh boy, is number of losses suffered by the opponent. Okay, so both sides are going to be rolling on here based on their combat value and shifts that they get from cards, maybe some applied against them as well, and from their tactics to get a value. Yeah, each player sums the total, each player shifts the column, and your leaders are going to force you into the higher numbered values if you have reasonable leaders. In combat result table on crossing, is number of losses. Yeah. Battle is won by the army which inflicts more losses to the enemy. If both number of losses are equal, the inactive player is the winner. It's a slightly more complex system than, the buckets of dice system that Here I Stand or Sword of Rome uses. I don't know how much it adds. there's advantages to buckets of dice systems. Okay. In a given army, if total of units' combat values is 0, the army automatically loses a land battle and suffers losses in accordance with general procedure. The winning army does not suffer any losses. So you wouldn't even be rolling if you have 0 combat strength. Now, there are units with 0 combat strength. For example, these little horses here have 0 combat strength. Why would you buy them? I don't know yet. Okay. After the land battle losses, each engaged army suffers losses. Players must distribute losses evenly. One combat unit cannot suffer 2 losses when another combat unit is still full strength, is in full strength. I'm sorry, I just have to pick on, the translational grammatical oddities. They amuse me in my own way. It was one of the charms I had when I first was dealing with my wife, was just the way some things were just a little off. She knew English very, very well. English very, very well. When the army of the Tsardom of Russia or the Ottoman Empire is defeated in a land battle, shown units are eliminated first, these guys, and then battle losses are distributed among remaining units. Okay. Is that a contradiction to one combat unit cannot suffer 2 losses when another is in full strength, or does that still apply? I don't know. This is stated first. This doesn't say contradiction. I would say that all losses are taken on this first, but this still applies, but I don't know. If all combat units are eliminated, accompanying commander counter is removed from the board. The commander can be used in the commander's changing phase of the next game turn if he's still in play. Now, this is kind of interesting because commanders are set up on the board, but there are additional commanders who aren't yet on the board and could swap in and out, so I don't know. The little standees are kind of hard to wedge the units in and out of compared to, say, plastic standees are certainly just counters on the board. However, that might be an easier thing to do than to move large sets of forces into a different box. Just as a kind of, it goes it goes half one direction, half the other. I've got to blow my nose or something. So where are we now? Losses. Retreat. If an active player loses the land battle, his or her army must move back onto the space occupied before the battle resolution. I don't think you're going to see 2 stacks of units moving into a space and fighting it. I think each move is an atomic event. You might be able to gather forces next to a space and move in, but it doesn't seem like there's any capability to say, I spend one ops point to move units here and another ops point to move units here. Shit, I gotta relight. This is taking forever, but that's not really the game's fault. I'm in a very dark place in my reality, so... if inactive player loses the land battle, his or her army must move onto a space controlled by superpower or onto terrain point. Superpower, whatever its stated superpower, it means the one last referenced, I guess. If the battle is resolved not onto an ally space, which could be problematic, and maybe that's not intentional. The reason it could be problematic is that could prevent a retreat. Let's say Austria is moving through ally Poland's space to fight against Russia. I wouldn't be able to retreat back into Poland, and that doesn't seem right. Again, your rules lawyer would probably say they can't retreat. I would say use Mr. Logic. Okay. If battle is resolved on fortified city or fortress space, 1 infantry unit can stay as garrison. Again, this is kind of like the withdrawal. I think the case is after you leave the space or as you're leaving the space, you basically leave it there, whether or not you fought a battle. So it's making sense. If Army unit retreats using trail, one combat unit suffers an additional loss. If it's impossible to conduct a retreat, all combat units suffer one additional loss, and they are immediately transferred to the superpower's capital city. I.e., you're not completely wiped out, so maybe it's not that bad a thing if you're defeated and have to retreat into Poland and can't. Well, then what would happen to you again? All combat units take an additional loss. Well, that's going to be pretty hefty, but at least the entire force isn't necessarily wiped out. After the battle, war experience. Okay, I want to come to something to note here. Withdrawal before battle, you're allowed to withdraw over sea. That is not allowed in retreat after battle. I think that's an important facet to note, and I believe that's what's intended, as opposed to it being just an omission. Of course, when you're reading rules like this, you don't know. You don't know. Like, I came up with like 10 pages of handwritten, very, very fine writing notes that I sent for La Grande Guerre as questions, and then typed up a number of them as responses. And, well, I typed it all up and then used them, and they're still online somewhere. I think they are like the closest thing to an official errata that game has. Okay. If the sum of combat values of each engaged army is 12 or more, the winner can move his or her military DP marker one box to the right. The loser moves his one box to the left. No choice for the loser. The winner can. Why wouldn't you want to? I don't know. After battle resolution during the current impulse, it is forbidden to move further that active player's army. Okay, so once you fight a battle, you're going to have to mark it so that you don't move it again on that single card. Now, the way it says things to move further, it still isn't very definitive. I'm beginning to think every space of movement causes attrition for a large army. And that makes sense. So I'm going to say, I'm going to involve those two rules that are, one is the before movement, you can combine forces, and one is the attrition for moving. That is on a space by space cost. Each time you do the operation, you pay the you have the option or you pay the attrition cost. That means large armies won't go flying across the board taking one attrition, which feels wrong. Okay. Naval battle. And of course, this not being forbidden to move is part of the war experience rule, but again, it's hard to arrange things in this kind of way as opposed to the real case number type SPI devices. 6.935 naval battle. Okay, a naval battle can be initiated only by the inactive player. They're allowed to do this in the following conditions when all of them are fulfilled. Superpower of an active player is at war. With them, I guess. Inactive player possesses naval units on a given sea. An active player moves combat units using movement across sea. Now, movement across sea is only this in-turn movement, right? That rule 6.931 is part of this in-turn movement. On the other hand, there was another way to move things across the sea, which was the strategic redeployment, which does not appear to allow any kind of interception. So, whether that's intended or not, that's what we're going with. Naval battle is resolved in a similar way as land battle, but combat value's sum cannot be shifted according to superpower's military level. Moreover, commanders' battle ratings are ignored. Okay, so this is really interesting. In a similar way, my feeling is it should just be the boats that are involved in the combat, not the transported units. But I'm not sure. And that statement doesn't help me, and we're going to find, I think, that there isn't one that does. Numbers of losses from combat results table mean numbers of naval units which must be eliminated. They are all like this with a flag on the other side, which is helpful because sometimes it's hard to tell the unit counters. They're not quite the same color. And sometimes it's hard to tell which color aligns with a certain country. So things like Denmark, it's white. Is it white, gray, what? I don't know. And it's not spelled out anywhere. If numbers of losses are equal, active player is the winner, and he or she can continue movement across the sea procedure. If the active player is the loser, they lose 1 operations point. What happens in a tie? I don't remember. And all combat units return to port. After unsuccessful movement across the sea on a given sea, it's forbidden to conduct next try during current impulse. Doesn't appear like it's forbidden to move again, though, in a different way. Now, what were we talking about? There are a few questions that have just come up onto the stack from this. 1, who wins or loses land battles? Okay, the inactive player wins ties. Good. Now, the inactive player is the person who initiates the combat, but yeah. Okay. The other is, what is the strength point total here? So what we're going to be seeing here is, like, let's say we had who are these? These are Turks trying to move through here, and they're intercepted by the Tatars, I guess. Not necessarily a likely situation, but let's say that's what happens. So the Turks would be at combat value 2, the Tatars at 3. The Turks have a bunch of troops on board their ship. Well, they have 2 counters, which have its own strength. It's not clear whether or not I add that. I think not, so I'm going to go with that. But then we're looking at like 3 strength points to 2, straight up rolling. It's going to be very likely that nothing happens in a naval combat, and the active player has to go home because they failed to win the battle because of that. I got to swap batteries. But we're on the sieges. I think this is a good point for me to stop. Actually, my voice, my health is not holding up. We're almost through the rules. I'm hoping once I get to playing, I'll be healthier, and also that the energy of play and whatever is different from slogging through the rules, right? I mean, it's always a slog through the rules. And with these, it's like a play test. It really is. So the next part of the rules is the sieges. A siege of a fortress or fortified city can be conducted only by an army which begins the impulse on that space. It's forbidden to move into the space and start a siege. The army must be composed of a minimum of 2 combat units, and one of them must be infantry. Moreover, it must exist a connection with controlled fortified city. Hold on. Okay. So, changing control of a city, 6938. Let's just skip over to that. The control of a city is changed when the following are met. Superpowers are at war. Army of a superpower or allied minor state moves on to the city. An operation point is spent. Religion of the city must be observed to place small control marker properly. Oh boy, 6.936, which is going to be in our siege section again. Now, this is a terrible thing to send me to. Look how big 6.936 is. It goes from here to the siege procedure, to the garrisons, through Danzig, and I don't see anything that calls out control. Now, eventually I see it up here. Yeah. And heresies are not heresies. They're just not your religion. As spelled out in that. Okay. So I was able to find it, but only because control blares out for me, right? It's in a nice typeface that jumps out. You don't want to direct somebody to a specific little rule with a header that's this far, that's this far away from where you're talking about. This is much worse than even GMT's very loose kind of rules systems in terms of numbering. It essentially, the numbers hardly matter. Okay, so we also need to look here. So city is one thing, fortress and fortified city are another. I think, whether there's a garrison or not, you have to siege everything that's not a city. Well, yeah, that you can control. You can't control terrain points. I don't remember, I think Sword of Rome might have had terrain point spaces in it. I know a few other CDGs have them in it. I'm pretty sure Here I Stand is not, but my memories, it's been a long time since I played it. Okay, so we're back up here. Siege of fortress can be conducted only by an army that begins the impulse. The army must be composed of at least 2 combat units, and 1 must be infantry. Moreover, it must exist a connection with controlled fortified city. Now, this becomes iffy. Again, is connection direct or is it not? And if it's not direct, it means you can't siege across here. But, and then how is it with controlled fortified city, which would mean, you couldn't launch sieges coming out from another player's territory if you had access, an ally or something. I don't know. And we'll see when I play what rules I make up, because I am left with a set of rules here that just are they're not specific enough. And I'll probably come up with something that's decent enough as I'm playing. It may be not consistent, though. Siege attempt costs an operational point. During one impulse, only one siege attempt in a given space can be conducted. I gotta blow my nose again. Some people, when I last had an illness like this, was when I first was up in Eugene, actually, and still had crap from Phoenix in my nose, I think. People were saying, wow, it's, unplayable, you shouldn't do this while you're sick. Well, there are reasons for it. One is, I've already blown a week away while sick and need to get on with this. I have no idea how long these sicknesses last. There have been times where they're a couple months long. They just get into my lungs and don't stop. And they predate smoking, actually, although smoking certainly doesn't help them. Just probably had some kind of nasty pneumonia or something when I was young and just never showed up, never went to a doctor or anything about it. Very young, like too young to decide things like that. Okay. Siege costs 1 ops point. You can only make 1. Fortress or fortified city. In fortress or fortified city may be 1 infantry combat unit as garrison. Anything else would have to be fought in a field battle. Player rolls 2 dice for the siege. The results are compared to commander's command rating. If the 2 results are equal to or lower than the command rating, the garrison suffers 1 loss and the besieging army doesn't suffer any. Okay, so you're rolling 2 dice and you're trying to get them under your command rating. which means siege might be very, very difficult for bad leaders, which is fair. If only one result is equal to or lower than the command rating, both the garrison and the besieging army suffer a loss. If both results are higher than the command rating, the garrison does not suffer any losses, and the besieging army suffers one loss. Obviously, this is very, very abstracted, right? If the besieging army is without any commander, the command rating of 1 is used for this procedure. Ouch. Now, interception requires a commander. I was going to say something requires a commander. Full strength unit, garrison losses. Full strength unit is flipped on backside. A weakened unit is removed from the board. Once a fortified city is without any garrison and a loss must be applied, then the space is conquered. To conquer it, the superpower needs 3... This is... Note how many you would need against a fully garrisoned force. Not of much importance. There should be a colon, not a period, right? Okay, small control marker is placed on the fortress. Big control marker is placed on the fortified city, generating like keys, victory points, and whatnot. The religion determines which side it's placed face up on. Now, you can convert the religion of spaces, and from what I can tell, since they're marked here, they then become kind of fixed as that new religion until they're reconverted back, is at least the intention. And I may have plastic filmy things just so that I don't smudge this up with grease pencil if I choose to go that route. Danzig. Danzig is a special city on the Baltic Sea coast. The city only formally was subjugated to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Wealth and trade position of Danzig gave the city broad independence. The city remained unconquered in the 17th century, but many tries were conducted. Sieges of Danzig had great impact on grain prices in Western Europe, which would cause the Dutch fleet to intervene. The procedure of Danzig siege is the same as the case of a fortress or fortified city. To conquer this space, however, you must get 6 successful siege attempts. A big control marker is used to mark that fact. So I guess if you successfully siege it, you get a big control marker. Note that Poland only has a little one there. They also only have a little one here at Königsberg. We don't know what the deal is with that. It may be that they're not fully controlled until somebody else takes them, and that's all. And then they can become Polish big control. On the board is Siege of Danzig track to mark siege levels. Immediately after the 3rd successful siege attempt, besieging player must conduct naval battle against the Dutch fleet. That should be marked here, just as a reminder. With a combat value of 8. It has no separate counter. If the player has no naval units or loses or draws the naval battle, the siege level drops back to 0. So you're not going to be able to do it without a big fleet in the Baltic, and frankly, it's going to be tough. It's going to be damn tough, as it should, since it never succeeded. If the player wins the naval battle, he or she is able to conduct the siege further. If Danzig is controlled by any superpower, the space should be treated as a fortified city. Future siege attempts are resolved according to the general rules, i.e., no more do you worry about this once a player has taken control of it. The Dutch aren't going to support it, whatever. Don't like sieging? You can assault. This option can be used only by an army composed of a minimum of 6 full-strength infantry combat strength units. The army must begin its impulse in the space. Only 1 assault can be attempted per impulse. Is assault in here? Yeah, okay. I just like to make sure because, siege and assault are close enough to each other that giving them both 1 occupied cost but not calling it out might be possible. By the way, nice thing here. Each of these has leverage into the rules, the indexing of the number. Okay, the assault procedure. You roll 1 die. Results from 1 to 4 mean 1 loss suffered by the garrison. 5 or 6 means 2 losses for the garrison. Then you roll 2 dice and total the results. This is how many losses must be suffered by the assaulting infantry. Okay. I don't know what this all means. So, 1 loss or 2 losses for garrison may or may not. So this is a separate thing from the siege, right? Do the same casualty ratios work, or rates work with this? So if you assault a city with a full garrison, the best you can hope to do is destroy the garrison, or do you get the city? I'm assuming the same loss results go in place. I don't know whether or not you can try to assault Danzig. It's not going to do you much good, but not if it has this 6 loss track, which is weird, very weird, to tell you the truth. Is there any limitation? Yeah, there is. Assault can only be used on a fortified city, not on a fortress or a city. Obviously, it can't be used on a city. So this would only work on the big squares. Therefore, we don't have to worry about the Danzig issue. The control of the city has changed when all the below conditions are met. Superpowers at war with each other. Army of superpower. This is normal control. You pay a point, flip the marker. Yeah, we read this already. Plunder can be conducted only on a space controlled by other superpower, i.e. you haven't flipped the marker yet. Moreover, that superpower must be at war against active player's superpower. The active player's army must occupy a space controlled by the enemy. It's allowed to enter it and then plunder. Doesn't have to follow siege-like rules there. Active player spends an additional operational point. The effect of a plunder, all auxiliary markers are removed. That's these, I guess. I would only know that because this is right on the same thing. That's not a term that I remember being called out before. Yeah, I don't see any section where it defines auxiliary markers until we get to here, maybe. Okay. And a famine marker is placed on the space. That's the skull and crossbones, not the poor harvest. Moreover, the superpower controlling the space loses 1 economic development point, which if it's on the 0 space, can cause them to just lose some economy directly. And remember, when you go from 0 and you back over it, you don't go back to 5. You just, boom, you fall far down, which may be a reason not to make improvements. To get improvements on here, just to give you some padding and then just leave it there, because the spiral down can be harsh from what I can see. Plundering armory can move further in accordance with general rules. Return to capitals. Now we're on 6.10, not 6.9. 6.9 was everything starting with playing a card, basically. It's the period of the player's impulses. After those are done, the armies return to capitals. Players transfer all their armies to their own capital cities. If the capital city is not controlled by the superpower, all combat units are removed from the board. The counters can be used for future recruitment. Now this is interesting because the first turn of the game starts out with troops deployed on the board, yet you still get a redeployment phase, for whatever that's worth. That might be important for the Ottomans, especially, who have a fair-sized army in their capital. Well, okay, most of the troops are in their capitals. There are a couple of units that are not in their capital at the beginning of the game. And so you start out in a situation you could not be in. You have more flexibility in a way, or maybe less because you've already got some forces placed. But If capital city is not controlled by the superpower, all combat units are removed from the board. Bye-bye. They can come back, though. Polish-Lithuanian has 2 capitals, Warsaw and Vilnius. This is Warsaw, this is Vilnius, where the army is. Player controlling that superpower can divide their armies between them. Army must be transferred to capital city disregarding distance and sea. It should avoid spaces controlled by other superpower or spaces with revolt markers. If it cannot, each combat unit suffers 1 loss for every entered space. But it's disregarding distance and seas, which to me means that you can walk on water here. You don't need a navy or anything. Feels funny. Maybe we don't do it that way, but but I mean, yeah, you could be caught off. I don't know. Anyway, if you have to move through enemy spaces or revolts, you take 1 loss for each combat unit per every entered space. So 2 entered spaces, you're gone. Garrisons of fortified cities do not have to return to the capital. Also, 1 army chosen by the player can stay on controlled space. So that's why they're... So this is an allowable situation. Okay, good. Infantry combat units of the Tsardom of Russia and the Ottoman Empire, but not garrisons, are discarded. Counters can be used for future recruitment. So that's something that's going to be, it's going to be hard to remember all these pieces. Like, I have the feeling I'm going to be working my way through the rule book like a cookbook, very procedurally to deal with this kind of thing. Otherwise, I will just forget this kind of piece. Shown combat unit of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is discarded if it's in an army without a commander. There's a lot of these. I don't know what they're meant to represent, but they suck. Only 1 combat unit per army can stay on the board. I guess 1 of these per army. Counters can be used for future recruitment. There's some kind of really light, irregular cav. Do the Turks have anything like it too? They do not. Oh no, that's not the Turks. Yeah, they do not. The Russians do not either. So yeah, to me that's very odd that the Poles have this incredibly light cav. So light that you can't even notice it. It takes casualties. That's the only effect I see. Auxiliary markers are... Okay, next phase in the game, you remove the auxiliary markers. Revolt, famine, good harvest, poor harvest are all removed. For each revolt marker removed, you'll be losing a domestic policy dev point. For each famine, you'll be losing an economy development point. For each good harvest... You pile these up, you'll be getting an additional card, but each poor harvest, you'll get 1 less bonus card. These take place immediately. And remember, things that you lose, they can tank your main track very, very fast. If I'm in this space and I lose 2 revolt markers, that would be 2 development points, but because of the way this is defined, where it doesn't go back to 5, it would actually be 2 full domestic policy levels, and I'd be just wiped out by that. How do you get rid of these auxiliary markers otherwise? I don't know. I haven't seen a way, and I have the feeling that this game is going to have countries devolving into chaos very, very quickly. In terms of their economies and whatnot. That may or may not be the intention. Maybe you're supposed to go back to the 5, but it seems to absolutely preclude that. According to the sequence and instructions on the ruler's card, players implement changes in domestic policy. This is ruler's domestic policy. Without any modifications, domestic policy remains unchanged. Okay. So I had not known what this does, right? It says decrease by 1 level. This happens every turn. It's not just it just is in effect. So this is at the end of the turn. If Rudolph is in play, he will fuck your domestic policy. Increased by a level. The domestic policy is increased by a level. That's a full level, not a domestic, not whatever these development points are. It doesn't say what to do with decreased by a level, but I think we can guess. Yeah. So rulers have a huge effect if they make it to the end of the turn. Okay, we're almost done. Winning the game. Victory points. You gain victory points. The total is kept track of here, no shock there. You get victory points for winning a war. Remember, it's the amount of territory you give back to the person who surrendered. You don't really get to keep anything. There's no real destruction of home areas here, like there will be in later wars, which I'm not sure about. Yeah. I guess I can buy it. Yeah, everything that's kind of contested and that could be taken from the heart of that could be taken from a country reasonably in these wars is in gray. And you weren't in the kind of total war where trying to take, a piece of that core territory happened. Although I could see a war for the crown of Poland or something. I need to swap batteries. This one's almost dead. Okay. Winning a war gives you some. Conquering a fortified city. Now it says you get a victory point for this. I don't recall that. 6.22. Let's go way back and see what that is. Ah, yes. Every time new victory points get revealed, I can't help but think of them as keys. I'm sorry. So conquering a fortified city changes your value. Having it conquered loses your victory points. So, and that may not be listed on here. Special events from cards marked with red asterisk. And those are going to be these guys here. And these are just mnemonic devices to help you be able to recalculate why your victory points are where they are. As are the war fate markers. They're just there like coinage to help you have another source of truth in case that gets bumped or something. And I think that's a great idea, honestly. Position on the economy marker on the economy track. So this can give you positive or negative victory points. And it's not like a collection of victory points. You don't accumulate them. It's just victory points for reaching that point. And you can lose them if you fall back from that point. Okay. Player controlling the Ottoman Empire can gain victory points for the Tatar invasion. And he has a track for that as well. Sitting here. Yay. I don't remember how it works anymore. This is the thing. Like, I am going to have to work through this procedurally again and again and again. And that doesn't thrill me. But after a couple of plays, I'm sure it sinks in well enough. But, yeah, I'm not somebody who gets a couple of plays for things. Player controlling the Tsar of Russia can colonize Asia. To start the process, the player must start the event special card, Exploration and Colonization of Asia. Is this one they're allowed to play to grab right away? It is not. Wow, they got 3 choices. None of which are recognizable words to me, which is a shame. Okay. In the next impulses, the player can conduct the action, Exploration of Asia, and Building a Colony action, which are here, 3 and 2 ops points to do those. Exploration of Asia enables movement of the marker according to pointing arrows into the next box on the Asia track, and you just move your way along. When a player conducts action building a colony, he or she flips the counter on the backside. In that moment, the player is awarded with number of victory points given in the box. So you probably want to collect the victory points in each box. If a player fails to reach the last box of the track during one game turn, he or she can continue the process in future game turn. Oh, this is painful. Okay, let's try reading this again because it doesn't make sense. Exploration of Asia enables movement of the marker according to pointing arrows into the next box on the Asia map. When player conducts action building a colony, he or she flips the counter on the backside. In that moment, the player is awarded with number of victory points given in the box. If player fails to reach the last box of the track during one game turn, they can continue it in future turns, but must play as event Exploration of Colonization of Asia special card. Ooh, okay. So, given that that card ends up in your discards, unless it's one of these, it's a special card. So if you play the special card as an event, you can keep pushing the track forward. Now, I would say you actually can't move this forward until you flipped it over. Because otherwise there would be no way to know that this victory point exists or not. It also makes sense from, a reasoning, logic point of view. Not finding the right words, I'm sorry. I'm not in good shape here right now. Because you wouldn't be able to continue pushing on and exploring without some kind of base of exploration. Although, the fact that these are zeros mean that you're not going to colonize them at all, which throws everything into kind of question, right? Or do you need to colonize those and get their zero? I don't think so. Okay. So you can push the thing forward. If you don't make it all the way on one turn, you can take it up again on other turns by playing the same card. And it's one of your specials, so you get it every turn. In the last turn of the game, in the last game turn, the player controlling the Tsardom of Russia is awarded 1 victory point for every 3 independent spaces controlled in Russian cultural zone. So I've got a marker here for every 3 independent spaces. I think this value is 0 right now. I'm going to put this here. Because independent spaces to me means the gray ones. As opposed to, I don't start with a buttload of victory points that I couldn't justify anyway. Here I'm at 8, which corresponds with this. How many do I get? 1 for every 3 independent. Doesn't say which way to round. I don't know. In the last game turn, the player controlling the Polish is awarded 1 victory point for every 2 Catholic spaces in the Russian cultural zone. But Union of Brest must be in effect. Now I've got 2 Union of Brest markers. I'm going to use this one to do something. I don't know. What is the numbering here? For every 2 Catholic. Yeah, so this is showing that already. So I don't know what this second marker is for. I think it's going to be an event marker. Okay. Moreover, the player gains in the last turn 2 victory points, having nothing to do with this, I think. 2 victory points for controlling Danzig, 1 for controlling Riga. I guess that's an additional 1 to the key value that I have for it. It's just important to me to control that Baltic Sea. And 1 for controlling Kiev. Well, there goes the Baltic Sea theory. Okay. I get nothing for Königsberg, though. Although I think if somebody captures Königsberg and I take it back, I get to put one of my fortified city key markers in there or whatever. In the last game turn, the player controlling the Kingdom of Sweden is given 1 victory point for controlling Karlskrona and 1 for controlling Malmo. You get a maximum of 2 this way. Well, yeah. Karlskrona and Malmo. Those should be Danish at this point. And yeah, there's a period of Swedish-Danish wars going on, kind of getting interspersed with other things. I don't remember which one it is, but one of the Musket and Pike games covers that war and the battles from that. Player controlling the Holy Rolling Empire gains victory points according to the Dominion of the Reich track. Now, I don't remember how you move that again. I think it happens during the 30 Years' War only. Okay. Automatic win. Before the last turn of the game, you can win in 2 ways. You win when you place a conquered fortified city, your last big control marker from your superpower sheet, and you uncover the "you win" space. Poland is not far. Or if you reach 29 victory points, you win the game at the end of the current game. Now, this is weird because there's these things in the last game turn. Not clear whether or not those count for you. My feeling is that they have to, but maybe that's not the case. So it would be really helpful to tell people. Oh, let's see. No, it would be really helpful to tell people whether or not it counts as the last turn. You know, do these only work if you make it to that last turn? This is similar to the disputes that I've got with empires in arms, whose victory conditions appear very, very ambiguously worded. And I go with kind of a strict reading of them. I'm not sure everybody does, because people come up with statement. I've seen statements made about the game that just don't seem to comport. Like, my feeling is when you play Empires in Arms, everybody will win, or nearly everybody, in most cases. And people may not accept that, and they may have changed the wording or twisted the wording so that that's not the case. But the way I read it, it would be almost impossible for everybody not to win the game. If none of the players achieve an automatic win, the player with the highest number of victory points after completion of the last turn is the winner. This leads me to believe that you don't count these last turn bonuses to get an automatic win. But I don't know. The interesting thing to see here, like this, there's nothing to help you find those. But when you look here, this has those last turn victory points written right on it that should channel right into the victory points that are on here. And that's what troubles me. If I have the mnemonic to remind me of the victory points, I feel like they should be being channeled into here. Similarly, Union of Brest, the victory points gained from here, well, this appears to give you the victory points at the time. Russia would be the 3 independent spaces, yeah. So anything that has a track that's feeding into this is going to be problematic if you're not tracking them at all times. But on the other hand, there is nothing to help you with the extra 2 points for Danzig, 1 point for Riga, and 1 point for Kiev, which should be in play already, if that was the case, right? So these are obviously not feeding into this. Those are clearly last turn things, which, same with the Karlskrona and Malmo. Those are clearly last turn. Let's see if anything else is. Yeah, the Tsardom of Russia, this thing. And that does not have an easy track into it. Okay. All right, so yeah. So none of those last turn points, they do not count towards automatic victory. Decided, agreed, and that is very much the same decision that I came to with Empires in Arms, which is that you get a bonus on the final turn, when victory is determined, but victory is determined when somebody declares victory. So, like, somebody can force the victory. I'll go into it when I get to it, I guess, if I ever get to the game. But it's just the way it's worded and the way it's set up. Basically, everybody's got a whole bunch of bonus victory points, which they can't use to end the game. But if somebody ends the game, they all get triggered. And, you're probably looking at the majority of the players, like 5 at least, reaching this sort of, yeah, we're doing okay. And I don't mind that. That actually that comports very well with how I see the Napoleonic Wars as having ended. There were a lot of winners. And some definite losers. Okay. Anyway, whoever has the highest points at the completion of the last turn is the winner. If 2 or more people have the same number of victory points, the winner is determined in accordance to the reversed sequence. It's the only time I remember seeing the reverse sequence come up. Went through a lot of space. If that's all there is for the reverse sequence, there's a fair amount of space to just say the reverse sequence is the sequence in reverse or something like that. But okay. Anyway. I know it sounds like I'm harshing on the game. I am still excited by it. There's no question about that. The only thing is, I am viewing oh boy, it's going to be a pain in the ass to deal with this rulebook, going through, playing it. Presumably the cards are going to be just as problematic as the rulebook. That's been my experience with games that have cards that have questionable rulebooks. And, it is what it is. I hope I have some fun with it, because this is definitely a period I'm very much interested in. And I very much like the Here I Stand system. Although it's been a long time, that this seems to share a lot with. And I also love Sword of Rome, but this feels more Here I Standish than Sword of Rome. Maybe just because of the era. All right, that's enough babbling. Let me send this up. I'll swap batteries again, because this one's almost dead and that one's had a little bit of time to charge.